I didn't know what to draw for Watership Down, so I just drew Cartoon Bunny, Frank from Donnie Darko, and a bunch of scary things, like flex tape. That one actually happened. Hello everyone, my name is Sam, and today, animation still isn't just for kids. Watership Down is a classic novel by Richard Adams, also can be called as Dick Adams, because I'm sure Richard Nixon. Watergate Down. It has had a few adaptations into filmography. For one, there was a 1978 animated film, and there is now a BBC Netflix adaptation that is CGI, or 3D animated, or whatever it's called. I don't know anymore. I've given up at life at this point. It's a story about rabbits, and also ethics and society and man's destructive footprint on nature, but mostly it's about rabbits. In 1978, the animated film was created, adapting the novel to the big screen, and it's quite honestly a big note in animation history. If you're an aspiring animator or artist of any kind, then I highly suggest seeing this film at least once in your life because it left an imprint in the hearts and minds of an entire generation, partly because a bunch of parents were like, oh, it's an animated film about little bum buns, little Jimmy will love it, and then little Jimmy got traumatized. But also, some kids were actually able to kind of grasp onto the concepts and ideas and themes that were communicated through this story, and it was better for them in the long run. So, a quick rundown of the plot. There are two brothers, Hazel and Fiver. Hazel's like the main character of this whole thing. He's the leader of the group, and he's trying to, we'll get to that. So Fiver is like, he has like a sixth sense that's like never actually like expanded on why he has that, but he has it, and he can like see premonitions into the future, and one of the things he sees is he sees the warren, or the down, like the rabbit community place area. I'm not an expert on rabbits, so I'm just using context clues to figure out what these words mean. But like the warren, the place where they live, he sees it cover in blood, and it's like a premonition that bad things are gonna happen. And he's like trying to warn everyone, and Hazel's like, I believe you because you're my bro. And they're like, well, we gotta get people out here because we're all gonna die. And only a group of people goes with them. They get like one member of the Outlaw, which is like a rabbit army, named Bigwig, and he goes with them, and they basically have to like take their small group and defect because they're like, how dare you disrespect us and like cause an uprising, you're doing mutiny, blah blah blah. Anyways, they go off into the wild, and then they're out in the open. They have to fend for themselves. It's spooky, it's scary, and eventually they find a place to basically set up their community. Along this journey, the Commander Holly from the Outlaw of their old community catches up to them, and he's all like beaten up and destroyed. And he's like, yeah, nah homie, you was right, everybody dead. Everybody dead. They all dead. Everybody. So they find their little place to set it up, and then they're like, oh man, we ain't got no whammons to smash. We gotta smash some whammons so we can procreate. And then they find out about a spooky warren nearby that oppresses its rabbits, and they want to liberate it. Also in the new one, Bigwig is John Boyega's persona. Had to throw that in there. From there, it's not hard to connect the dots and like basically what happens in the story. I'm not going to go too into it because I want to leave something for y'all who haven't seen it to kind of, you know, experience the story. For those of you who have seen it, y'all know what happens. I don't need to explain it to you. Honestly, for what I want to talk about, we don't gotta go that deep. We don't gotta go deep into it. And also, I get the feeling that the actual structure and events of the story are pretty secondary to the themes and concepts that they explore. As with most literature you would find in a high school classroom. Probably why I found so much of it boring, because they were like, who needs a story? We're just gonna talk about spooky, scary censorship. That's what everybody's gotta take away, and as a result, that's all I remember, because their stories were not memorable at all. All I remember from 1984 and Fahrenheit 451 was they were both going for women who are inappropriately young for them. But we're not here to talk about that, so what concepts am I talking about? Well, some would say that the big message of this story is that communism is bad, because that's what people always say when they read literature like this. Which, like, yeah, I get how you can take that, I get how you can, like, see what's going on and sort of, like, find a way to interpret that, but that's extremely surface level. If anything, it's saying fascism is bad, which fascism isn't quite the same as communism. But regardless of all that, none of that is the meat of this message. The main message of this story is something that anyone who has taken an ethics class will be familiar with. And that idea is trying to balance liberty and freedom with security and society.
They tell us it's better to give up a little liberty in exchange for safety, but it's a load of old Landry beard.
There are two sides to the coin here, where you have communities in this story, like the Efrafa, which have very strong societies, and as a result they use it to oppress their people. And then they explore the fact that there are challenges in walking away from society altogether, being left to fend for yourself, which we see in this situation isn't practical either. Which is why this story is less focused on the idea of capitalism versus socialism, which would be what it would be doing if it was saying communism is bad, and it's more so focused on the idea of the balance between authority and liberty. And there are strong cons and pros to each, but the thing is you need to find a place in between where it kind of balances out. So you got people saying, I'm going to be protected and taken care of, but I'm not giving up too much of my freedom or individuality to have that happen. Which pretty much every political ideology and theory covers somewhere where they think that that balance should be, and it's a pretty subjective thing. But the point is those two opposites can exist, it's just an idea of finding a balance. Which is the primary theme in the story of Watership Down. I'm glad that I got to use my college degree to actually seem like I got a couple of brain cells, but also Richard Adams was like, there is no political statement to this. It's just rabbits. Stop trying to read into it. But there's like so much like explicit political theory in the text that like you can't be like, oh, it's not there, because it is. What I want to talk about more than anything is the differences in approach between the 1978 version of this story and the 2019 Netflix BBC adaptation. Because the approach between these two are artistically very different from each other. And as tempting as it is to go through and be like, let's change this and that and the other thing, I don't think that's interesting. And I find it much more interesting to track all of those differences back to the root source, which is the fact that there are two very different approaches and styles between the two adaptations. I'm saying adaptations a lot, and I'm pretty sure that it's actually adaptations, but you know what? I'm gonna die one day, so. Now obviously these are two different mediums of animation. The 1978 film was hand-drawn 2D animation, and the new one is 3D animation. With 3D animation, the capabilities of making realistic visuals are so much more attainable. So that seems to be the approach that they went with this adaptation, and these visuals are definitely realistic. All of the models and environments look great. The only drawback is the animation itself. And let me just clarify that when I say animation, I'm not just talking about visuals, because some people just use it as a blanket term to be like, the animation looks bad, when they're talking about the art style, or they're talking about something that isn't necessarily the actual animation, which refers to the movement of the subjects within what's happening. Like that, I'm talking about the movement of what's going on in the actual animation. And it doesn't look good. It looks like a bunch of preset cycles. They're kind of stiff and unnatural looking, and it brings an uncanny valley type of feeling to the whole thing, where it's like you got these super hyper realistic environments and models and visuals, but then it doesn't move right. But all around, the style of the modern retelling is something we call in the art world realism. The approach to this version of the story would feel more grounded in reality and work to be as realistic as possible. It's like they said, if this was really a thing that happened where like rabbits are smart and they got all this stuff going on, how would the story of Watership Down actually play out in real life? For example, a lot of the criticism I hear in this version of the story in relation to the old one is that the characters aren't as likable, or they overstep their roles in the story. But I think that goes back to trying to make it seem more realistic, because sometimes how things would actually be in real life wouldn't be the best writing decisions. But when they're going for realism, you can't really complain when they put that over good writing. I mean, you can, because everything's subjective, but you can't do it in a way where it's like, I'm right and you're wrong, because it was just a different approach. But sometimes it does work well to serve the writing, because honestly I feel like the characters in this version have a lot more dimension. They have their traits that drive their motivations, but also don't define them, to make them feel like real people, or at least real personalities. Because in all honesty, with the 1978 film, I felt like a lot of the characters were flat. And I'm not just talking about the style of animation. And there's definitely a big advantage for the retelling in the fact that they got 3 to 4 hours to tell the exact same story that the original told in less than an hour and a half. There's so much more time dedicated to developing the characters and fleshing out certain chapters of the story. I won't lie though, there were definitely some pacing issues. Scenes start to drag, and some of the establishing shots were going on a little too long. It's like they did all the things that they wanted to do to expand on the story, and then realized they still got time left to fill and had to improvise. But the thing that the original movie definitely has over the Netflix adaptation is the fact that it is a visually better work of art. There's a lot of really thoughtful composition, there are a large range of colors that fit together well, and the animation style gave the ability to get surreal with the imagery to better communicate how disturbing and eerie the contents of the story actually are. What this was a more expressive or formalist approach. This is a style of a more abstract approach to storytelling. And in a lot of ways, I honestly feel like that's part of what made the Watership Down film so special. They say show, don't tell, but in the abstract, you can show and tell all at the same time. And one of the most mentioned scenes in context of changing things between the two adaptations is when Captain Hawley tells everyone how the humans killed their Warren. And in the 2019 version, we're shown a dark scene of a bunch of rabbits frantically digging upwards, followed by a shot of an excavator arm pulling up the ground they were digging, implying that it somehow killed them. However, in the 1978 film, colorful and disturbing images were used to drive home to the viewer that the Warren was destroyed and its rabbits were massacred, leaving a disturbing image in the mind of the viewer, and drove home just how horrible and horrific the careless destruction of nature actually is, as opposed to showing us what happened with no narration and with no really graphic gritty details, but just enough detail to make it so you're not inspired to actually imagine the gritty details. Not to mention, this scene is only one of many in the new one where it is impossible to tell what's happening because of the lighting. I had my brightness turned all the way up and I could not see a thing. Of course, this does tie into realism because of course if you're underground or if it's at night, you're not going to be able to see, but this is where formalism actually works to your advantage because formalism isn't trying to portray things how they would be, they're trying to portray them in a way that will best communicate what's happening in the story to the audience, which in this case, I think that's pretty essential. So which do I think is the better portrayal of the story? Well, I honestly enjoy both for different reasons. I like the fact that so much more was covered in the BBC version because of the longer runtime, but obviously I had some issues with it. Then I appreciate the expressionist and artful telling in the classic film, but the lack of detail due to the runtime as well as some other nitpicks make me appreciate things about the Netflix miniseries, which is where I kind of stand. Both have things that they did better or worse than the other one, and combining that with such different styles makes both valuable in their own way, similar to the styles themselves. But as always, if we're going to go by public opinion, the book was better. And I say if we're going by public opinion because I never read the book. Maybe one day, but for now, my name is Tom, and that's all I got to say. Roll the outro. Thank you for watching Let's Talk with Tom on the Roundtable, but Tom isn't just on the Roundtable. I have my own self-titled personal channel, I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram, I have a Snapchat, I have all that good stuff. In fact, I even have a Tumblr. So, if you're interested in any of that, check that out, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!